Welcome to Fantasy Book Night at the Library of Congress. I'm Ramon Samuel, one of the staff members here who put this wonderful event together, and yeah, I've been running the tarot card reading portion of this. Have any of you guys been able to get one done? Awesome, awesome. If you haven't, be sure to get one pulled, doing something interesting at the library for you guys. It's kind of the highlight of my career. All right, so this is a very special night. We really want to bring in our fantasy readers to let them know that the library is a place for them as well. We have a lot of cool events going on, and I know you're all here for Olivie Blake. Yeah. So, Blake is the New York Times bestselling author of the Atlas series, which is concluding with the new book, The Atlas Complex. Also tonight, we have moderating Stephanie Handy, who is our senior selection librarian with the National Library Service for the Blind and Print Disabled. Please note that there will be a brief Q&A after the conversation, and if you have any questions, be aware that your participation will be, you give us permission to record you, so just know that. Right after this event concludes, Olivie will be signing books in the Whitall Pavilion, I believe, and that's right to the left when you exit. Now, please do me a favor, turn off all of your cell phones and electronics as we get ready. Without further ado, joining us tonight, please give me a round of applause for Olivie Blake and Stephanie Handy.
Hello.
That's the most dramatic entrance I'm ever going to make.
Right. You should have come up with a pose beforehand.
I know. I was like, God, I could make this so theatrical.
Really milk it for all it's worth.
I know. I try, nerdy is fine. I try not to get too dorky, though.
Yeah.
Such a fine line.
Well, I hope you're all having a wonderful time at the event this evening. I know Ramon was telling you a little bit about all of the great activities that are going on, so if you haven't had a chance to check them out, I hope you will. I won't repeat. I'm sure he gave you a great intro for Olivie Blake, and we're so pleased to have you here.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. I expected many fewer of you.
Yeah, we get the.
I was like, why would it? There's a whole other panel going on right now. Why would anyone be here?
Oh, wow.
So thank you. Thank you for your highbrow taste.
I was thinking that maybe we could start. I'm sure most of the folks here know about your series, especially with Atlas Complex just coming out in January, I think it was. But maybe you can give an overview of the series or the first book for those who haven't.
Yeah, so the Atlas series, it's called the Atlas series in the US and the Atlas trilogy in the UK, just as a little piece of tedium for you. My US editor doesn't like the word trilogy, so it's the series here. The Atlas series is about the Alexandrian Society, the caretakers of lost knowledge from the Library of Alexandria and on throughout history. So it takes this idea that there are these hidden archives that contain all sorts of information and knowledge, and particularly that magic is one of those things that has been happening behind the scenes over generations and generations. And every 10 years, 6 very, very talented magicians who are called Medians. And the difference between a witch and a Median is that Medians are university educated, in case anyone was wondering.
It's very fancy.
There's real academia to my academia. So six very talented people are tapped to join, and only 5 of those can be initiated. And of course, the one who isn't initiated is eliminated in a very casual sense.
Yes. Very chill.
So the trilogy follows these 6 characters, and spoiler, something goes wrong in book 1, which is why it extends out through book 3. But it was really I actually self-published the first book. At the time, I like to talk about how with creative careers, there's no like ladder to climb. There's no clear corporate trajectory. So you basically are failing until one day you find out that actually you were succeeding, which is what happened to me. I thought I was a failing writer, and it turned out that all I had to do was go viral.
Just, you know, easy.
Yeah, it was like super simple, actually. I'm so
Should have done it sooner.
I'm so off track already. This is what the whole evening is going to be like. I flew here on a red eye, and like I barely know where I am. But I just have to tell you that in my years of starving artisthood, I went to see the dentist, and I did not have dental insurance. And but I chipped my tooth when I was a kid. And it came off again, and I had to have it replaced. And he was like, you should really get a veneer. Like, a veneer would last longer. And I was like, sir, I can't afford a veneer. I shouldn't even be here. And he said, he had no idea what I did, no idea of my background. He goes, here's what you do. You write a book. You sell it for $5. You sell 1 million copies. You have $5 million. This is something that a man actually said to me in real life.
Did you ask to read his book?
He's a dentist. He's fine.
I'm just saying. That's his backup plan.
Yeah. So I don't know what I was saying. So I self-published the first book. I thought it was very unusual in that I was using 6 unreliable narrators, and that the real story sort of lived in the juxtaposition between the interiority of all these 6 people who saw the world in very different ways. That I wanted the reader to be sort of actively involved in deciding what the objective truth was, because none of the characters were going to tell you. They were always projecting what they thought, what their opinion was, what they saw, and that you would see two people's opinions and decide, okay, what really happened? And I was like, publishing won't want this. And publishing probably wouldn't have wanted it if Book Talk hadn't wanted it. So, I'm very much crowdsourced. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. So yeah, you ask questions.
Okay,
now.
My turn. Well, that was actually, this was a great segue on your part by accident, because the first thing I was going to ask was about the fact that it started out as a self-published book,
yes.
Which I was going to say maybe you don't know, but now you know.
Now you know.
This worked out perfectly. Mm-hmm. And I was going to ask you about how it felt to, because this is a fairly unique situation where you're coming back to a book that you are thinking of as done. Like usually
yes.
When a book is published and put out in the world, that's it. You don't come back to it. I mean, nonfiction textbooks where they do 10 million editions, sure, but
yeah.
Your average novel, no. And I was wondering how it felt to come back to that and change pieces of that, and if it had any big, because obviously changes were made, but for you, did it have a big impact on the trajectory of the story across the trilogy, or?
Yes, so I wrote the Atlas 6 in 2020, and then I wrote the Atlas 6, self-published it, and then I wrote a book called My Mechanical Romance, which I wrote under my real name. Olivie Blake is not my real name. My real name is Alexine Farrell-Fulmuth, and under that name I write young adult rom-coms. And so I actually got my first traditional publishing deal as Alexine, and I was like, I guess I'm a YA author now. Like, I guess that's what I have to do now. That's my job. And so I put the Atlas series aside. I knew it was going to be a trilogy, but I was like, right now what I have to do is what people are paying me to do, and I'll come back to Atlas. And then for some reason, the Atlas 6 went viral. Like, I truly don't know how to explain it. The only thing that I can say is, like, sociopolitically speaking, every time there's a new social media platform, something like this happens. Like 50 Shades of Grey happened with Twitter, I think. And The Martian happened because of like the rise of blogging, or like so there's always, as technology changes, there is, fortunately, I think, a shift in the way that we consume art as well. And so I like to look at it as, it makes sense in the pandemic. This, we've got TikTok, this very visual medium. I was very smart enough to make friends with an incredible artist, Lil Kamara, who I commissioned to do the portraiture that's in the book. It was like its own, it was something to feature, which was not that common before. If I can be really proud of something, it's that I've brought art back to books. I personally did that.
And the illustrations are gorgeous if you haven't seen them.
I mean, it definitely is the case. I think you are much more likely now to find that fantasy authors especially can push for art in their books, and like, I did that. And you're welcome, everyone. And, but yes, okay, so I got to revisit the Atlas 6 in a different way than I revisited some of my other backlist books, because some of my books were also previously self-published. Masters of Death and One for My Enemy both saw stylistic changes. So no one told me I had to change things. I was just like, I cannot look at my 2018 writing. I can't do it. Like, I can't let people see this now that like the Tor logo is on it. Like, it's, so I spent a lot of time just elevating the language, but with Atlas, because I knew it was going to be a trilogy, it was my opportunity, and I'm very much a pantser. I don't know if you guys were here to listen to Travis Baldry talk, but he like outlines like some kind of maniac. Like, I don't understand that at all. But so I wrote book 1, did not know where the trilogy was going. I knew the feeling. I knew that the end result would be this catharsis. Like, I knew the sensory images of the ending, but I didn't necessarily know how we were gonna get there. And so having the opportunity to work then with an editor to structurally revisit the Atlas 6 was great, because it allowed me to prepare better, foreshadow better, once I had actually started writing book 2.
Yeah.
So it wasn't, it was such a, just everything that happened to me was just insane confluence of like luck and, I don't know, cheap shots. It was just such a gift on so many levels. And
Yeah.
Just gonna be here like, I'm so grateful. I'm just happy to be here, you guys.
We're glad you're here. So I'm actually going to go back even a little further.
Yes.
At this point.
Yes.
We're just moving back in time. And you've mentioned previously that Atlas 6 started to an extent as a series of character studies.
Yes.
I was curious was it always those 6 people? Were there others that didn't make the cut, or did those 6, were they different at some point? Did they drastically change?
So when I first started, so I come from Fandom. I wrote fan fiction for many years. Yeah, I got my 10,000 hours in Fandom. So for me, character always comes first. Character studies, like, I think a lot of what I do and a lot of what I like about books are you know, portraiture. Authors who are very good at like, let's look at a character, let's recontextualize the story by introducing a new character. Character work is really important to me. So when I started writing books, though, I always say that the first thing you write, when you begin a new artistic medium, the first thing you do is essentially trace. The first thing you make is derivative, because it's what you know how to do. Yeah. So the first thing I wrote was a portal fantasy, and it was very like Neverwhere, kind of Narnia, and it had the characters Tristan, Libby, Nico, and Ezra. They were the 4 main characters, and they were college aged, and I was building out a quartet, and it was going to be very good versus evil. Like, they were all coming together to bring down the big bad, and it was just unbelievably boring. And so I put that book aside, and then I revisited it later. A few years later, I was like, I think there was something there. Like, maybe, like, you spend a lot of time on a book, you can't think it's totally pointless. No word is ever wasted. So I went back, I read it again, and I thought, these characters are very interesting, but the stakes aren't right. Like, I can't do the good versus evil thing. I want to do something that's more interesting than that. Callum and Parisa were background characters, which is really hard for me to believe now, because when I wrote that, they just like, it was just all eyes on them. Mm-hmm. Like, when they were on the page, they were the only thing on the page. Yeah. And so I pushed them forward. I pulled Ezra back for reasons. And then I came up with the stakes. I was like, oh, one of these people has to be eliminated. And I made them older, and then I knew it was complete when I came up with Reyna, because I I had a thought that I was like, wouldn't it be funny if there was a character who could hear nature speak, but she just thought like, fuck off. Like, and once I had that, like most of what I write is like a little joke between me and myself. Yeah. And so, but once I had like, I talk about my characters as if they're shades on a color wheel, and they each have their equal and opposite. And so once I had Raina, I had like the full like spectrum that I wanted to explore. Complete. Yeah, that it was like, okay, I now understand. And then Raina was a real, like, she was kind of the crux of the story as well, that I had this idea. I went to see, I came up with the ending of the trilogy because I went to see a tarot reader, very topical. And, you know, like I said, these were my years of failure. And for many years, every time I did a tarot reading for fun or palm reading or whatever, I would always ask the same question, like, am I on the right path? Is it incredibly selfish of me? I had dropped out of law school at this point. I had just devastated my mother. And, you know, and it was just like, I was just not going anywhere, couldn't figure out, and I just, all I wanted to do was write. The only thing that felt right to me was just writing all the time like a sickness. Yeah. It was a real Hamilton wrote the however many. And this particular tarot reader, when we did a past, present, future reading, and for the future, I pulled the Sun card, and the Sun card is like, to shorthand it, it's kind of your passion. It's the thing that drives you. And she was like, you have to keep doing what you're doing, because eventually the world will not look like this. She put it in terms of Pluto moving from Capricorn into Aquarius. If you're an astrology girly, like, you know, that's a big deal. We haven't been in Aquarius since the French Revolution, so I'm also an Aquarius. Anyway, she was talking about it in terms of the world is going to change. And the things that we think are important now will not always be important. This pressure I was putting on myself to like be driven in a profit kind of way is not always going to be important. And she was like, and when we move into this next phase, we need people who have passion like this, people who have the endurance to really carry this energy a long time, because we need people to follow. And I did not apply this to my life at all. I was like, this is Raina. Like, this is Raina. This is how Raina is going to change things. Or like, it's not so much that these books are about how the world changes, or it's not about like what happens to make the world change. It's about how we change with it, or what we need to do in order to, yeah. It's a weirdly existential series. Like, you know, me, Sartre, it's all the same, really.
Yeah. Well, so speaking of the powers, though, this is great. I gotta tell you, she did not know the order that I was doing questions in or anything, and she is segueing perfectly, you know, each time.
Yeah, I'm a writer. I know a narrative arc.
Yeah, we've got this all going through. What I was gonna say next is talking about the fact that, you know, for each of the characters that has magic, but especially those main 6, there's a lot of give and take in terms of how their powers manifest and who they are as a person, and there's always a bit of a struggle there, and it especially comes up too as they start to broaden their own understanding of their powers. And I was curious if, and this is a just for fun question, if you could go down the road and thought experiment and have any 2 characters swap powers just for fun, just to see if it would be chaotic, how they would act differently with those powers compared to who normally has them, or if everything would catch on fire, if it would.
Yeah, I actually think it's a mark of characterization that you actually cannot change there. Because like Parisa is a great example. Parisa is a telepath, and much of her life is determined by the fact that she can see what other people think. Right. So like much of her life and what she thinks about people, Parisa and Callum are the 2 that really struggle with the human element, because they, in their minds, understand what humans are. And because they're so affected by thought and by emotion and by things that are very, very fluid, they have a harder time interpreting the positive in humanity. And it truly is, like Nico, as a physicist, understands the world in physical terms. And this is something that, like, I just saw Veronica Roth at Y'all West, and she did a thing about how a character's flaws should drive the plot, that their flaws should be very, very critical to what happens, because otherwise it's just like, you know, a clumsy rom-com hero, and it doesn't make any sense. You know, that they have to have a flaw that's specific to moving the plot forward. Yeah. And I think that was definitely, going into the Atlas complex, it was like, how are all of these things going to implode in this very specific way? Is because we remove from a certain situation the two characters who can see the human element. And that's a huge weakness. And I think, so it kind of goes back to my whole thing about the color wheel. Yeah. There's just like the absence of any of the characters is extremely detrimental. And it's written into the structure of the elimination ritual as well. It's this idea that when you have 6 and they're evenly balanced, and if you know anything about me, you know I went through a weird hexagon phase where I was just like really obsessed with with hexagons and their relevance to quantum theory and how often they appear in nature. And I was really leaning on the idea of 6 and the strength that just what happens when you take one away and all of a sudden like the whole table wobbles. So I was really playing on, I was leaning in a Shakespearean, very like Greek tragedy way of like, how do we make all of this go wrong? We remove a certain element. Yeah. And, you know, all of which is a very long-winded way of saying that I couldn't switch their powers around. They'd be completely different people.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, along those lines, if you had powers, what do you think? And you know, it informs personality, so maybe either if there's a power that you just think would be fun to have, or something that you think would be informed by who you are as a person. Is there any, have you ever thought about that?
Yes, I would be a telepath for sure. I already have a very dim opinion of people. And like, I'm not interested in carrying the emotional burdens of others. I would like to know what they're thinking though.
I'm also nosy. That would be a
yeah, it's a real voyeuristic quality of mine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the underlying themes that comes up a lot in these books is this whole concept of how to live ethically within an unethical system. And especially in terms of, you know, concepts of power and exploitation, and the idea of trying to hold knowledge as a limited or exclusive resource and therefore a form of power. And I was curious or not curious, but I was hoping you could talk about that a little bit more.
Have you guys read Come and Get It by Kylie Reid? Okay. You should. Kylie Reid, here's what Kylie Reid is good at. You guys can tell her this for me, I've never met her. She's really good at making you feel so uncomfortable throughout the whole read. You're like having such a good time, and then all of a sudden you're like, no. Like, my favorite, I used to have a little like online book club, and we did Such a Fun Age, which is Kylie Reid's debut. And the like overarching question I posed was like, who's the worst white person in this book? And that's the kind of like nausea that I mean. And so Come and Get It is all about how all these what seem like casual and fun relationships are extremely informed by money and by how like our positions in society are determined by class, not in a British class sense, but in a sense that's very built into capitalism. And it was so dark. It was so depressing. It was so good. In her acknowledgments, she mentioned a book called Monoculture, which you emailed me, and I was like, I'm reading this book called Monoculture. Like, you can't stop me.
It was one of the first things she told me.
Yeah, you can't stop me from telling you about my thought exercises. But so the idea behind Monoculture is that in every like era, which you can really only see in retrospect, but in every era there is a story that defines us. And so for for a period there's religion. Everyone is defined by their relationship to religion. And then after that it was science for a while. Like the Industrial Revolution is everyone's defined by their relationship to science. And right now we are defined by our relationship to economics. We are defined by the importance we place on profit. And that was very much like, so I just read this, but I'm like, so jazzed about it because that's what I was writing against. When I started writing the Atlas series, I was writing from an extremely, just a place of absolute rage. You know, this is 2020. We remember 2020, right? And I was just so angry and so, I wanted to have a baby. But I did not feel that was an ethical decision. I didn't feel that bringing a child into a world when I could not guarantee their bodily autonomy, I couldn't guarantee they wouldn't get shot at school. I couldn't, like, you know, there was so much like darkness to the decision that as much as I wanted to have a baby, I didn't feel I could defend it. Climate change too. There was the report had just come out that was like, we have 10 more breathable years. And I was like, I don't want to bring a child into the world for 10 years. That feels dark. And my husband kind of recontextualized it for me, because he was like, there have been many times in history that we feel the world is ending. And it's not, because it's very, you know, not that I wasn't right to some extent to have those thoughts, but I was coming to it from a place of very individualized, from this monoculture place of like, we live in a world where no one is ever satisfied, where all resources are scarce. It's this just complete fallacy that we can't share resources, that we can't change things, that we can't go against a system that has been in place for so long. And he basically was like, the world is not ending. The world is not you. And he meant it in like, he's a physics teacher. He meant it more in like, microcultures will move on. We'll like, you know, we'll adjust, our skin will change or whatever. Yeah. Like, I don't know. He was talking to me about evolution, and I was thinking about living ethically in a world where it's impossible to be ethical, and which is the situation that plays out with the Atlas series. That's like, okay, you have to kill someone to have all the knowledge and power in the world, and we spend the entire first book justifying why that should happen. I wanted to invite you to be complicit in this decision in book one. That's just like, we're gonna do this really unethical thing. We're gonna say that murder is okay for these reasons. And because it means it will justify access to these very scarce resources. And then followed throughout the books to ask, why are those resources scarce? And is that, I'm hesitating here because I'm not sure that I necessarily answered it. You asked a great question, which I don't know if you were going to get to because I'm taking up all your time.
We do have time for it. We're cutting out some of the questions, but we can get into that
But
too.
you asked me something that I'm still thinking about, which is there an ethical version of the Alexandrian Society? So the Alexandrian Society has developed all of this knowledge and kept it secret. And they spend most of the book defending why the mob cannot have access to all of this. And they have their natural enemies. They have the Forum that wants the opposite. And not to spoil things for you, but the Forum is made up of unethical men as well. And I don't mean to say that only men can be unethical.
But these ones are.
Right. Not all men, but almost always men. But I love that you asked me that, because even though I wrote these books, I don't know if there's an answer to that. I don't think that there necessarily is an answer to that. It requires such a change in the story of how we live our lives. Yeah. Because we would have to rely on a world that doesn't derive profit from propaganda. Yeah. And can that exist? And I would love to believe that it could exist, but can we? Is there ever a time when that's not a vulnerable belief? So where did this start? These books are, I was trying to work through something, and I don't know that I arrived at an answer. I did arrive at something. I arrived at the idea that you don't have to have a meaning, that you don't have to carry around a purpose. You don't have to drive towards something because capitalism tells you that you have to. You can work against that story. You can say that that story is boring and false, and that it is worthy to live, to choose to live, to want to live. That is the point. And that to live ethically means to make the next right choice, which I know is in Frozen. So you don't technically have to read the books in order to walk away with that message.
New read-alike for your next...
Yeah. But, so spoiler alert, I did have a baby. Thank you. He's turning 3 soon. I'm very fixated on his birthday party. Like, I'm barely thinking about my answers to this because I'm worried about, you know, what I'm going to serve at this party.
I can make that my next question.
Thank you. And it was a hard decision to make, and it's one that I question a lot. But it's also one that gives me a sense of responsibility. You know, that it's like it's my job now. I got to make those choices. I have to behave in a way that is not status quo, that is not under the conditions of the story. I am rejecting the story. The story is false. As an artist, I can say things like that. Yeah, I don't know what. Yeah. I would have loved to end in a more powerful place.
No, but well, and actually, we are actually at a point where, if you'll notice, we have 2 mics set up here. So if anyone has any questions that they'd like to come up and ask Olivie.
Oh wow! Look at you guys. You even had to stand up too. Oh, well, some people are leaving. Okay, bye, guys.
All right, later. All right, well, we'll alternate. I'll wait till it quiets down a little bit.
Guys, you're disrupting the class. If you're going to sneak out, you have to do it quietly and with grace.
You're in a library. We're all going to shush you. Like,
okay.
All right. Would you like to go first?
Sure. Thanks so much. Hi, my name's Jill.
Hi.
And my question for you is, since you mentioned you came up in fandom, is fandom related? What was your favorite fandom to write in and your favorite fandom to read? And do you still have time for either?
Okay. So I wrote Dramini. I wrote a very mentally unwell 4 million words of Dramini fan fiction. People sometimes ask me if I'm retired. I would not say that I'm retired so much as conscientiously objecting at this point. It's all still available for you to read. It's up on AO3. I didn't even change my username. It's Olivie Blake. If you have never read fan fiction before or are someone on my tour team, then I recommend Divination for Skeptics. It's my tightest one. Anyway, so I've spent a lot of time in the Harry Potter fandom, although it's been some years since. But I do still occasionally write things whenever the mood strikes. I think the last thing I wrote was Rebecca fan fiction. I thought that Max de Winter had like serial killer vibes to him. Like, what's gonna happen to his next wife, you know what I mean? I actually didn't like to read the ship that I wrote because I was like, they're doing it wrong. I read a lot of Rare Pairs. I actually did just recently, I'm rewatching Downton Abbey. And I just recently looked for, like Mary Matthew Forever, of course. But I kind of am bummed that nothing happened with Charles Blake. I don't know, is this relevant to anyone? So I looked up Mary and Charles Blake fan fiction, and yeah. So like I still, every time I consume media, I go check out what's going on AO3. Sometimes I regret that. But sometimes I just like to try it out. I once looked up Moana, and I don't know why I did that.
There's always those ones you don't want to tread into.
I have also recently searched for Padme and Obi-Wan, which I think there should be more of. And I do plan to, at some point, write the cave scene from Kushiel's Dart by Jacqueline Carey. Yeah, Jacqueline Carey does closed-door romance, and that's cool, but I'm gonna open it.
We'll open it like the doors right there.
Yeah. Oh, we're gonna peer inside the cave.
Yeah.
And watch that priest get it on. Okay, yeah. Yes, thank you for that question.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Emily. I'm a writer too when I get the time, and I'm also a pantser. And I was curious about your relationship to pantsing because for me, I like the excitement, but sometimes the stress of not knowing what comes next, especially if thinking about a second or a third book. Like, I can't imagine completing a trilogy that way. So I was curious to hear more about your relationship to pantsing and how you potentially deal with the excitement versus the stress of the unknown.
Yeah. Yes. So I'm a pantser. If you're not familiar with that term, that incredible craft term. Another word for it is a developmental writer. What is the word I'm thinking of? You know what? It'll come to me. Part of having a baby means that half my vocabulary fell out of my brain, and it has not come back. So there's that. So I try sometimes to write with what I call a living outline. So the Atlas 6 was written this way, that I always give myself the first act, so approximately 20,000 words, to discovery writing, that's what it is. I don't start writing until I hear the character's tone in my head. Like, once I understand the narrative voice, then I start writing, and I write about 20,000 words until I understand like their motivations and what's driving them, what their world looks and feels like. And at that point, I force myself to stop, and I write down like the next 5 to 8 beats. So it's like, what I am most concerned with, I don't think that there is a correct way to pace a novel, but there are genre constraints and there are reader expectations. And so basically, I ask myself, what do I like in a book? What works for me in a book of this genre? And why is that? And so for me, I can buy into pretty much anytime. If the narrative voice is interesting, I'm there. I'm good. I think like Night Bitch is a great example of that. Catherine House is an incredible example of just like the voice is so compelling, I'll follow her everywhere. And those are arguably books that don't have a lot of plot, which also arguably my books don't have a lot of, depending on how you look at it. And so with the Atlas series, like I would identify where the beats needed to be, like where we needed to feel motion. And I would kind of identify skeletally what that would be. It would be like, fight scene here, or like, romantic scene here. I shouldn't say romantic scene, a slutty scene here. And that worked really well for me for Atlas. It has not worked well for me since then. Gifted and Talented is a book that's coming out next April, and I tried to do the same thing. After 20,000 words, I stopped and was like, what's this book about? And then I was like, I don't fucking know. And then I stopped again at 50,000 words, still didn't know. I stopped at 100,000 words, nope. And it is 160,000 words long. And I can tell you what it's about now, sort of. But it's definitely the kind of book, like, luckily, I'm at a point in my career, I'm fortunate to be at a point in my career where people enter my work knowing that's kind of what they're going to get. With debuts, you do have to be tighter, and that's why I had to work more on the Atlas 6 and on making those beats like very firm and like having the sense of action. One for My Enemy is actually an example of I was actively trying to increase the pace of scenes. I wanted it to feel like an escalating heartbeat. So the scenes are very short and they move very quickly, and they're structured almost like a play. So for me, I really enjoy playing with form. And yes, I pants because I get bored easily. I have tried to outline, and it's just so boring. Like, once I've outlined, then I already know the story. And if I know the story, then what am I even doing? And like, why are we here? And I just think, writing is so hard, and publishing as an industry is so difficult and filled with rejection that if you're not having fun, then what are you doing? For me, I pants, and then I spend a lot of time in revision. So my drafting process is quite brief, actually. I usually draft things within like 6 to 8 weeks. And then I spend easily double that revising and making sure that all the foreshadow beats are there and that every like emotional moment really lands. My drafts really only get longer. But yeah, I mean, I think that unfortunately, the way that publishing works and to get through the gatekeepers is you do have to create a debut novel that is going to be the least weird thing you ever do. And then, like, every debut novel has to be similar to something that already exists in the market. And that's depressing and a bummer, and I'm sorry. You could do it the way I did it, which is by magic, I think.
Just talk to her dentist.
Yeah,
he'll tell you how to do it.
So here's what you do. You write a book. But yeah, I think that it does help, I think, if you just identify, there is no right or wrong way to write a book. It's what you like or don't like, because you can really only write to please yourself. You don't know what an audience wants. You do not know what the market wants. Publishing doesn't know what the market wants. But you know what you want. And so if you can identify what books you love and where those beats are, and just like give yourself that much framework, then you can fix everything in revision.
Thank you.
And I think everyone who's up for questions now, that's as much as we're going to be able to do, because we are getting
sorry,
a little.
I talk a lot.
If we're going to be able to get to the signing.
Yes.
But yeah, please go ahead.
Oh, all right. So dipping my toe back into the sort of self-publishing versus publisher ocean.
Yes.
Was there ever any disagreements that you had with them? And how was the experience with the first book versus moving on through the series versus other titles? How has that experience been for you?
So I like to point out that you can have a viable financial career self-publishing. A lot of times people kind of approach me with an air of like, you won self-publishing because now you're traditionally published. And like, yeah, I won because I didn't want to self-publish. What I wanted to do was traditionally publish, and it was just that I didn't feel that I wasn't getting anywhere with some of the stories I was writing. But I just like to preface with, if you write for the right age group and the right genre, you definitely can self-publish if you enjoy running your own business. I did not want to be in charge of my own production. I think that is boring as hell. And I also hate promoting stuff. So to me, it was like, I want to write my little stories and someone else can be in charge of all the other things. And so definitely there is some trade-off, because in exchange for not having to do all the stuff I consider boring, like audiobook production and foreign rights and interior design, which I was doing wrong for many years. It's fine. The compromise is that in exchange for someone else doing that, I have to take somebody else's input. And I do think it's valuable. I think especially, I have a great editor in that she and I see the world very differently, and my agent does as well. I chose my agent because she brought things that I had not considered to my attention. She was very good at details I didn't care about. I don't fuck with setting, really. Whatever. We are where we are. Where are we going? I don't know. In Gifted and Talented, there's this extreme moment of emotional catharsis toward the end. There's just this absolute climax of you should have tears in your eyes. You should be super moved. And my editor goes, "What kind of shoes is she wearing?" I don't know. I don't care. But you need input like that, because what I care about is only catering to me, and the point of publishing is to sell a book to as many people as possible, and to make a book feel like it could satisfy as wide a variety of audiences as possible. And some of those audiences want to know what shoes she's wearing. I don't know why. And so a lot of it is just working with someone I trust enough to understand that this input is important. It means that the book will now speak to someone in a way it didn't before. Masters of Death is a very good example, because when I first self-published Masters of Death, a lot of people did not get what the game was. A lot of people still don't get what the game is, but are more able to buy into the vibes because I spent a little bit longer on just certain moments of it. So it's things like that a book that did not used to speak to people is now a New York Times bestseller because I spent the time making it make sense to someone other than me, which could have been accomplished by hiring other editors. I just didn't want to do that. I don't know if you could tell, I'm extremely self-indulgent as a creator. And yeah, so it's just, my experience has been that I didn't love self-publishing. That was never my goal. It was more like, I wrote a book, I wrote another book that publishing doesn't want, so do you guys want it? Was like kind of what I was doing, and not necessarily paying it as much detailed attention as it needed. But now being able to focus on just the meat, the creative part, that's all I ever wanted to do. So for me, it is a very good decision. Although I understand that now is a very difficult time in traditional publishing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, my name's Elizabeth, and I'm working on my first full novel finally, and as somebody who is really relying on kind of the marriage between science and magic in my manuscript, how did you manage to find the balance to make them complement each other in your story rather than reading 12,000 JSTOR articles and writing an academic paper, or creating just like a magic system and tacking on like, and maybe gravity has something to do with it at the end? How did you find a way to make those work together?
I'm not the most detailed world builder. I did a panel with Suyi Davies Okunboa and Emma Turs, and they are both much more detailed than I am. For me, I just need I come from a social science background, so I just need the systems to make sense. I need to know, like, you know, what are the natural consequences, which is also how I parent my toddler. And so for me, I read a lot about quantum theory because it interested me. I read a lot of Carlo Rovelli, who I love and recommend. He's a nice blend of like physics, philosophy, and history. And so it was interesting to me, and I was reading things that I didn't know yet what I was going to use them for. When I got really into hexagons, I was like, what on earth am I going to do with this? It doesn't matter. I'm just going to follow it down this weird little rabbit hole. Like, I'm already here. And then from there, making sense of it was just like, what does the audience need to know in order to understand how this works, and what is extraneous information? I think always with magic systems, you as the author know more than anyone who's reading needs to know, as long as you understand how things work. But an example I like to use for this, to bring Disney back into it, is that Reina has very similar powers to Isabella from Encanto. Except that Isabella she can use her magic limitlessly. It costs her nothing as long as the family is sound. As soon as the family relationship is not sturdy, then her powers go away. Versus Reina is more of it's a physical thing for her. Using magic it costs her in terms of sweat. And so making decisions like that, like what is the cost of the magic, that's as much as I think you need to know. I don't bog myself down in like how exactly does all of this work. I'm sure many people would prefer that I did. And to them I say Asimov exists. And many other hard science writers. To me that was like, what was interesting to me, again, I'm just going back to like, is it interesting to you? If it's interesting to you, it'll be interesting to somebody else. I think just the organic, like the thing that makes your brain buzz, it's like, that's where you want to be. That's where the best art is. I always fall back on Neil Gaiman's make good art speech. Like, it's something I tell myself all the time when I'm feeling frustrated by, I don't know, Goodreads or whatever. The important thing is, are you making good art? Are you making authentic, important art to you? Is what you're saying, you know, valuable? Is the structure like not falling down? Is it good art? And then I think beyond that, it's taste.
All right, last question. Oh, sorry. Last question.
So kind of a technical thought experiment for you.
I love thought experiments.
Let's
I
go.
love the way that magic systems let fantasy authors break traditional writing rules, and I think a great example of that is Parissa's telepathy, letting you kind of hop perspectives in the middle of a scene without breaking it.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the privilege and opportunity that you have to do that as a fantasy author?
Oh, yeah. I am a strange fantasy author in that the way that I approach fantasy is I have very I have very literary sensibilities. I do things that belong more in a literary genre because they're like not as, it requires defining genre, which is hard, which is something I think about a lot. Like what defines fantasy as a genre? What makes it different from science fiction? What makes it different from horror? And I think some of that is just the framework of pace, and which is also something that's a difference between adult and YA. I'm having like 8,000 thought experiments now. You've really opened a door here. And so I move slower than other fantasy does, and I focus much more closely on the character's interiority. But having the freedom to have fantasy systems is just very excellent for me. But the way that I do it, because I write contemporary fantasy and I'm writing in a version of our world, is really just to I almost see it as closer to science fiction, that instead of writing my own rules, I'm turning a dial on something that already exists. So in the Atlas series, I just said, quantum theory is real now. And this is, and what people think theoretically is how it works is now how it actually works. And in Gifted and Talented, which is based in, I created an industry called Magitech, and it is essentially Silicon Valley, but with things turned up. Biomancy is one of the things that happens, but it still functions very much like an existing, it's basically like Silicon Valley had access to magic. And so a lot of what I'm doing is just taking a thing that exists and projecting what would happen if it could do this, which to me feels closer to science fiction in terms of world building. But then someone just recently asked me if there was a difference, or can you have fantasy without magic? And I've been thinking about that for weeks. Because how do you understand genre? Anyway.
That's a long-held debate.
I know, right? It's a question I had never heard phrased that way, because people always ask, what's the difference between fantasy and science fiction? And I feel that I have my answer for that, which is what I just explained. I think that science fiction is not making rules, it's changing the structure of what exists and going with it, just assume, playing yes and. But to say, can fantasy even exist if there is no magic, is a very interesting question, which is not what you asked me. What did you ask me? Paris's telepathy was very fun. There is one scene I always again, I don't know if this is going to answer your question, but there's a scene I like to talk about. In the Atlas 6, there's a scene I like to call the Callum and Parisa misery waltz. And there were two ways to approach that scene. We could write it from Parisa's perspective, because it's happening to her. But if we write it from Parisa's perspective, then I have to show you what's happening inside Parisa's head, and I have to confirm for you whether those things are true or not. If we exist inside her head, then I have to show you Parisa's past. And I didn't want to do that at the time. What I wanted to show you is, look what messed up thing Callum is doing in front of all these people. Look at him really sticking his foot in it and not even noticing, because he's so wrapped up in his own power. Just the utter wonderful narcissism of writing the characters and being so in their heads that you as the audience maybe don't see certain things because they don't want you to see them until later. That's just, I don't know that that's specific to fantasy, but certainly that you're right. It allows me to perform certain sleights of hand, which I think is, you certainly can do it in other ways. There's the sort of ongoing debate about first person and third person, and that I looked at and left. But there are certain things you can do, in a close first person. It's very easy to hide things, because if you're only looking at one person's opinion and only what they know and only what they see, then there's lots that you can keep from the audience. I think it's why I tend to write short form in first person. All of which is a really long way of saying, I love writing, it's so fun. And I really love form, especially, and I think that was what was so great about writing fan fiction for so long, is that there were no form rules, that I could make an alternate universe anytime I wanted, and it gave me the kind of experience I could never have gotten from a traditional classroom. I don't have a formal English background. I have never really studied literature, and what I understand about writing as a craft, I learned from doing it and from having just insane amounts of peer feedback, some of which was not useful. But yeah, it's really fun. I hope you're having fun.
And I hope you've all had fun tonight. Well, that's all the time that we have here because we need to get you up to your signing.
Yeah, okay, let's do that.
All right, thank you all.